At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI slop. In the end, what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it this way. My name's I Am Duck. Let's begin. When Professor Glonix found 3 students standing in his room, holding a copy of the galactic monster Encyclopedia, he immediately knew what this was about. It wasn't the first time students had sought him out, despite his teaching days being long behind him, and all because he had been among the first group to visit that infamous Death World, one of the Encyclopedia's original authors. "Let me guess," Glonix said, his weathered voice hinting at the annoyance of having had this conversation before. "The 3 of you are here because you disagree that the galactic monster encyclopedia should focus so much on Earth." The 3 students exchanged shy glances, their yellow eyes widening slightly as if surprised by how easily Glonix had read their intentions. Like the professor himself, they were Levirians, but where his age had taught him the art of concealing his thoughts behind carefully neutral expressions, these younglings wore their emotions as plainly as the distinctive patterns on their scales. Each of them displayed the characteristic dual coloring of their species, purple and white scales creating swirling patterns as unique as any human fingerprint. Their single short horns centered on their foreheads absorbed the soft light of his study as they shifted nervously on their bipedal legs. Zoara, the apparent leader of the trio, took a step forward. She clutched the encyclopedia against her chest, embracing the thick tome as if it were a shield. "We are here about the encyclopedia, Professor," she admitted, her voice enthusiastic. "But we didn't come to confront you. We wanted to understand. What kind of place is Earth? Why does that single planet produce such monstrous creatures that they warrant 49 pages of a 50-page galactic publication?" The other 2 students, Zabar and Ginto, nodded in earnest agreement, taking supportive steps forward to flank their companion. Their scaled faces reflected the same genuine curiosity, mixed with bewilderment, that Glonix had seen in countless students over the years. Professor Glonix released a long, contemplative sigh that seemed to deflate his already hunched posture. His purple and white scales, dulled with age, shifted as he considered the earnest young faces before him. "Since you're being so polite about it," he said finally, a hint of his old teaching enthusiasm creeping into his voice, "I suppose I can explain what you want to know." The students' faces immediately brightened, their yellow eyes seeming to glow with excitement. Zawara opened her mouth to ask her first question about Earth, but Glonix raised a clawed hand, cutting her off before she could speak. "My team and I collected an enormous amount of data about Earth," he said, moving toward his desk with the careful gait of someone who had learned to respect artificial gravity generators. "Enough data, in fact, to create an immersive virtual reality simulation of the planet's various biomes and inhabitants." He paused, turning to fix them with his yellow eyes. "I assume the 3 of you have neural implants?" Of course they must have them, he thought to himself. No academy worth its accreditation would accept students without the standard implant translators these days. The technology had become as essential to galactic education as writing implements had been in earlier eras. "Yes, Professor," Zabar exclaimed, his scales practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "We all have them." "Oh, this is incredible," Ginto added, his usually reserved demeanor cracking to reveal genuine excitement. "You'll show Earth to us instead of just talking about it." "That's much better than we hoped for," Zawara chimed in, her grip on the encyclopedia loosening as anticipation replaced her earlier nervousness. Glonix nodded slowly, but his expression grew serious. "Get chairs and sit down first," he instructed, gesturing to the various seats scattered around his cluttered study. Trust me on this. If you don't, you'll return to reality with horribly tired legs and aching backs. The simulation is comprehensive, and we'll be spending considerable time there." The three students nodded eagerly and immediately set about gathering chairs. It amused Glonix to see them dragging the furniture around with such enthusiasm, especially considering that one of the chairs was older than he was. A relic from the previous century, with worn cushions that had molded to countless different anatomies over the years. They arranged themselves in a small semicircle, perching on the edges of their seats like excited hatchlings awaiting their first lesson. Meanwhile, Glonix moved to his own chair with considerably more care. Unlike these younglings with their flexible joints and resilient bodies, he had learned through painful experience that even virtual reality simulations posed certain dangers at his age. He adjusted his back support, ensuring his spine was properly aligned. His neck required particular attention. The wrong angle could leave him with a splitting headache for days. Finally, he positioned his arms on the specially designed rests that would prevent circulation issues during extended sessions. Once he was properly situated, feeling as comfortable as his aged body would allow, he looked at his eager students. "Are you ready?" he asked, though the answer was obvious from their excitement. Three heads nodded in perfect unison, their short horns moving up and down. Glonix assessed his neural implant with the skill of someone who had been using the technology since its earliest iterations. Through the interface, he sent a command to his virtual assistant. "Load archived Earth environmental data. Initialize shared virtual space. Include users 4. Safety protocols engaged. Pain feedback enabled at 40%. Environmental hazards full spectrum." The transition was seamless, yet jarring. One moment they were sitting in Glonix's cluttered study with its familiar scent of old books and preserved specimens, and the next reality seemed to dissolve and reconstitute itself around them. The walls melted away like ice on a hot day, replaced by towering columns of brown and green. The air of the old office vanished, supplanted by something thick, humid, and alive with 1,000 different scents. The silence gave way to a cacophony of sounds, chirping, buzzing, rustling, and distant calls that seemed to come from every direction at once. They stood now in a verdant forest, where massive trees stretched towards a sky barely visible through the dense canopy. The light that filtered through was different too, not the gentle red glow of their home star, but a harsh yellow radiance that seemed to penetrate everything it touched. Most immediately noticeable, however, was the gravity. It pressed down on them like an invisible hand, making every movement require conscious effort. "By the ancestors," Zawara whispered, her voice quiet over the forest's symphony. She turned in a slow circle, her yellow eyes wide with wonder. "Everything looks so real." "It should," Glonix replied, a note of pride creeping into his voice, despite his attempts at professional detachment. "When we visited Earth, we were being sponsored directly by the Galactic Federation. The environmental scanners we used were the absolute best that credits could buy. Military-grade equipment, really. Every molecule of air, every photon of light, every sound wave, all recorded with perfect fidelity." A distant roar echoed through the trees, causing all three students to instinctively move closer together. Zawara's scales had taken on a slightly paler hue, a sign of nervousness among her species. "Professor," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "we can't actually die here, can we?" Glonix's expression might have been a smile, though it was hard to tell with Levirian facial structures. "No, you can't die, but—" He paused, fixing them with a meaningful look. "You can feel pain. The simulation is set to 40% feedback, enough to be educational without being traumatic." He tilted his head slightly, studying their worried faces. "Your fear of huge monsters is certainly justified in this place, but what you truly should fear are the smaller ones. Small ones? Ginto asked, confusion evident in his tone. What do you mean by...
Aha! Like those,
Glonix interrupted, pointing at the one clawed finger at Zawara's arm. My arms are itching, she exclaimed, beginning to scratch frantically at the affected areas. Mine too, Zabar yelped, slapping at his neck where several of the tiny creatures had congregated. What are these things? Ginto demanded, his usual composure completely shattered, as he discovered at least a dozen of the creatures on various parts of his body. Professor Glonix laughed, actually laughed at their distress. It wasn't cruel laughter, but rather the amused chuckle of someone who had experienced this exact situation before and lived to find humor in it.
When we first visited Earth, we solved this problem with full-body environmental suits, completely sealed with their own air supplies and temperature regulation. Cost a fortune, but worth every credit.
He gestured at their current predicament.
Here in the simulation, however, you'll just have to endure it. Consider it part of your education.
The three students exchanged looks that spoke volumes. Perhaps they were beginning to regret their curiosity about Earth. The excitement that had animated them moments ago had been replaced by a mixture of discomfort and dawning comprehension. After a few seconds of frantic scratching and uncomfortable silence, Zawara asked in a small voice, Professor, are these mosquitoes? Are they in the monster encyclopedia? This time Glonix's laughter was fuller, more genuine.
Oh yes,
he said, his yellow eyes gleaming.
They have 5 pages dedicated to them, 5 full pages.
The shock on the students' faces was almost comical. Zabar stopped scratching long enough to stutter. 5 pages? For something so small?
Small?
Glonix shook his head, his expression growing serious.
Size is irrelevant when it comes to danger, young ones. My team and I classified mosquitoes as a Category 5 biohazard. Some of us argued they should be classified as a weapon of mass destruction.
The students looked at each other, clearly thinking the professor must be joking. These tiny irritating creatures couldn't possibly warrant such dramatic classification. Seeing their skepticism, Glonix continued, his voice taking on the cadence of his old lecturing days.
I wish I were joking. Let me explain what makes these small creatures so monumentally dangerous. First, they are perhaps the most efficient disease vectors in the known galaxy. They spread pathogens, viruses, bacteria, parasites with an effectiveness that would make a biological weapons engineer weep with envy. Malaria, dengue fever, yellow fever, Zika virus, West Nile virus, chikungunya. The list of diseases they transmit reads like a catalogue of horrors.
He paused to let that sink in, noting how the students had stopped scratching to listen with rapt attention.
Second, he continued, their reproductive rate is staggering. A single female mosquito can lay hundreds of eggs, and those eggs can mature to adults in as little as 10 Earth days under optimal conditions. Give them standing water and warm weather, and their population explodes exponentially. Third, and this is crucial, they evolve rapidly. Humans have been trying to eradicate them for millennia, using everything from chemicals to genetic modification, and mosquitoes simply adapt and survive.
Glonix gestured around them at the humid forest. Even here, on their home planet, among natives who have evolved alongside them for millions of years, mosquitoes are lethal. Do you know how many humans they kill every year? The students shook their heads mutely.
Approximately 725,000 every year. That's more than all of Earth's large predators combined. More than their wars in most years. These tiny creatures are the deadliest animals on the planet to humans, and humans evolved there.
He paused for a moment.
Now imagine what they could do to a species that hadn't evolved those defenses. A Leverian, for instance, with no natural immunity to Earth diseases, with blood chemistry that mosquitoes have never encountered but would readily consume. The implications hung in the humid air between them. Finally, Glonix delivered his conclusion. Humans could probably cause more damage to a planet by releasing mosquitoes there than by dropping one of their atomic bombs. At least radiation eventually dissipates, mosquitoes establish themselves, adapt, and become permanent residents. The utter shock on the students' faces was exactly what Glonix had expected. Slowly, reluctantly, they began to accept that perhaps, just perhaps, mosquitoes deserved their 5 pages in the monster encyclopedia.
What? What else should we fear here? Zabal asked in a low voice, as if speaking too loudly might attract more dangerous attention.
Oh, where do I begin? Glonix said, clearly warming to his subject. Let's start with the other insects, shall we? There are bees, flying insects with venomous stingers that attack in swarms to defend their hives. Some species of earth bees can kill large mammals with their collective assault. Then there are the spiders, 8-legged predators that inject liquefying venom into their prey and drink the resulting soup. Some can kill a human with a single bite. He noted their increasing pallor and continued mercilessly. There are ants that can strip flesh from bones, working in colonies of millions. Wasps that lay their eggs inside living hosts, their larvae eating the paralyzed victim alive from the inside out. Botflies that burrow under skin to gestate. Ticks that transmit diseases while being nearly impossible to remove once attached. Assassin bugs that liquefy your insides. Murder hornets that, well, the name speaks for itself, doesn't it? The students were now looking at the forest floor with deep suspicion, as if expecting an army of horrors to emerge at any moment.
We could spend all day just talking about insects, Glonix said, beginning to walk deeper into the forest with the somewhat stiff gait that the heavy gravity imposed.
But there are much larger, dangerous things on this planet. Follow me.
The students hurried after him, though hurried was relative. The oppressive gravity made every step feel like they were walking through thick mud. Their legs evolved for their homeworld's lighter pull, struggled with each movement. Even Glonix, who had experienced this before, found himself breathing harder than normal.
This biome, he explained as they trudged along, pushing through hanging vines and stepping over twisted roots, is called the Amazon rainforest. It's one of Earth's most biodiverse regions, which translates to one of its most dangerous. I want to show you something particular.
They walked for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the gravity making time stretch uncomfortably. Finally, the trees began to thin and they emerged onto the bank of a river. But calling it a river seemed inadequate. It was a massive brown serpent of water, stretching so wide that the opposite bank was barely visible through the humid haze.
"By the old ones,"
Ginto said.
"It's enormous."
The Amazon River, Glonix announced. One of the largest river systems on Earth. But what's truly amazing isn't its size, it's the monsters that live beneath that muddy surface.
He gestured for them to crouch down at the water's edge, though none of them ventured too close.
Let me introduce you to just a few of the aquatic nightmares. First, the caiman, essentially an armored aquatic predator with bone-crushing jaws. They can grow to several meters in length and have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years because of their already perfect killing machines.
The professor manipulated the simulation, and the water's surface rippled. A massive prehistoric-looking head emerged briefly, regarding them with cold, ancient eyes before disappearing beneath the murky water.
Then there are the piranhas, he continued. Small fish, but they hunt in schools of hundreds. They have teeth like surgical scalpels and can strip a large animal to bones in minutes when feeding. The smell of blood in the water triggers a feeding frenzy that has to be seen to be believed. Again, the simulation responded to his commands. The water near the bank churned suddenly, and they caught glimpses of silver bodies and flashing teeth as a school of piranhas decimated some unseen prey. But perhaps the most incredible, Glonix said, his voice taking on an almost reverential tone, is the electric eel, though believe it or not, it's not actually an eel at all, but a type of knife fish. Electric? Zoara asked, incredulous. As in, it uses electricity. 600 volts, Glonix confirmed. Enough to stun a human, cause temporary paralysis, and potentially cause drowning. It's a monster of shallow waters that literally hunts with lightning. It generates electrical discharges to navigate in muddy water, communicate with others of its kind, and yes, to hunt and defend itself. The professor tweaked the simulation again, and in the shallows near the bank, a long serpentine form became visible. It was perhaps 2 meters long, with a flattened head and tiny eyes. As they watched, small fish swimming nearby suddenly went rigid and floated to the surface. You can touch it if you'd like, Glonix offered, with what might have been a mischievous grin. It's just a simulation after all. You'll feel the shock, but it won't cause permanent damage. The 3 students looked at the electric eel, then at each other, then took a collective step backward. I thought so, Glonix chuckled. They stood by the river for a moment longer, watching the muddy water with new respect and considerable wariness. Finally, Glonix spoke again. We could spend all day exploring just the Amazon rainforest and its creatures, or we could take a look at the other biomes. Each one is deadly in its own unique way, with its own set of monstrous creatures. The students readily agreed to move on, apparently having seen enough of the Amazon's aquatic horrors. Very well, Glonix said, accessing the simulation controls through his neural implant. Let me show you something completely different, yet equally terrifying. The world around them shimmered and reformed. The oppressive humidity vanished, replaced by dry heat. The towering trees dissolved into scattered acacias with flat tops. The muddy river was gone, replaced by vast grasslands that stretched to the horizon, golden under the harsh yellow sun. The sounds changed too. Instead of the constant insect buzz and bird calls, they heard wind rustling through grass, distant bellows, and the occasional roar that seemed to shake the very air. The African savanna, Glonix announced, spreading his arms to encompass the vast landscape. One of Earth's most iconic biomes. The students looked around in wonder. Despite the continued oppressive gravity and the uncomfortable heat, they couldn't help but be impressed by the stark beauty of this new environment. Herds of animals were visible in the distance, massive shapes moving slowly across the plains. It's so different, Zoara observed, her scientific mind clearly engaged. Completely different flora, fauna, climate. It's like a different planet entirely. And that, Glonix said, is precisely why Earth is such a terrifying death world. It's not just one hostile environment, it's dozens of them, each with its own unique ways to kill you. A creature perfectly adapted to survive the Amazon would die quickly here, and vice versa. Yet Earth life has colonized all of these environments, evolving specific adaptations for each one.
What about the predators here?
Ginto asked, eyeing the grassland nervously. Oh, there are plenty of large carnivores, Glonix replied. Lions, leopards, cheetahs, wild dogs, hyenas, all perfectly evolved killing machines. But you know what's often more dangerous than predators? He paused for effect. The herbivores. The students looked skeptical. So Glonix led them across the grassland, the simulation adjusting to show them various animals as he explained. Take the rhinoceros, for instance, he said as a massive grey shape materialized nearby. The creature was like a living tank, with thick armor-like skin and a massive horn protruding from its snout. Herbivorous, yes, but with notoriously poor eyesight and an aggressive temperament. They charge first and ask questions later. That horn can punch through vehicle armor, and they can reach speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, despite weighing over 2,000 kilograms. The rhino in the simulation snorted and pawed the ground, causing the students to instinctively back away despite knowing it wasn't real. Or consider the hippopotamus, Glonix continued, the scene shifting to show a waterhole where several massive, barrel-shaped creatures wallowed. They look almost comical, don't they? Yet they kill more humans in Africa than any other large animal. They're incredibly territorial, can run faster than a human despite their bulk, and their bite force is among the strongest of any land mammal. Those jaws can snap a crocodile in half. As if to demonstrate, one of the hippos yawned, revealing massive teeth that looked more like weapons than anything meant for eating plants. Then there's the African elephant, the professor said, and the simulation obliged by showing them a small family group of the massive creatures. The largest land animal on Earth, generally peaceful, but when threatened or in a must, a type of hormonal state in males, they become unstoppable forces of destruction. They've been known to flip vehicles, demolish buildings, and their intelligence means they can hold grudges and seek revenge. The students watched in awe as one of the elephants used its trunk to uproot an entire tree with casual ease. But let's not forget the smaller dangers, Glonix added, his tone becoming more serious. This continent is home to some of Earth's most venomous snakes. The black mamba, for instance, one of the fastest snakes on the planet with venom that can kill a human in 20 minutes. The puff adder, responsible for more snakebite fatalities than any other African snake due to its excellent camouflage and aggressive defense. He paused, then continued with obvious relish. But perhaps the most remarkable is the spitting cobra. Evolution has given it hollow fangs that work like hypodermic needles for injecting venom, which is remarkable enough, but it can also spray that venom up to 3 meters with startling accuracy. And do you know what it aims for? The students shook their heads. The eyes. Always the eyes. The venom causes immediate pain and can cause permanent blindness, if not treated quickly. For Earth natives, it's a serious medical emergency. For non-Earth species without natural resistance, he trailed off meaningfully. But Professor, Zabar interjected, surely we could develop antivenoms, treatments. Perhaps, Glonix agreed. But consider this. You haven't evolved alongside these creatures. Your biochemistry is fundamentally different. A snake that might sometimes kill a human could invariably lethal to you. The antivenoms that work for humans might be useless for Levirian. Or worse, toxic themselves. And it's not just the animals. Even contact with random plants here could prove fatal. There's one called the manchineel tree, where even standing under it during rain can cause severe burns as the water carries its toxic sap onto your skin. The magnitude of Earth's hostility was clearly beginning to sink in for the students. They stood in the simulated African sun, sweating despite their scales' usually efficient temperature regulation, struggling against the gravity and eyeing every movement in the grass in deep suspicion. Professor, Zawara said slowly, I'm beginning to understand why Earth has 49 pages. I'm actually impressed it doesn't have all 50. Glonix sighed deeply. We couldn't do that, no matter how much some of us argued for it. If we had, we would have had to rename the publication the Earth Encyclopedia, with a small footnote about the other worlds. The editorial board would never have approved it. The 3 students exchanged meaningful looks, a silent communication passing between them that spoke of newfound respect and a considerable relief that they lived on their relatively peaceful homeworld. You 3 have been very well behaved, Glonix observed, denoting their increasingly uncomfortable expressions. I don't think I need to show you Florida or Australia." He paused, then added with what might have been malicious glee, "Unless you want to see them. Australia has spiders the size of dinner plates, and everything there seems to have evolved specifically to kill humans. Florida has alligators, invasive pythons, brain-eating amoebas in the water, and weather that regularly tries to scour all life from the peninsula." "We're satisfied," Zoara said quickly, perhaps a bit too quickly. "Completely satisfied. The gravity and the mosquitoes are annoying even though they're not real. Could we return to your study now?"
The simulated discomfort is getting to be a bit much,"
Ginto added diplomatically. "My legs feel like they're made of neutron star material," Zabar contributed. Glonix nodded, understanding their distress. "Very well." With a thought, he commanded the simulation to end. The savannah dissolved around them like a dream upon waking. The oppressive gravity lifted, the heat dissipated, and suddenly they were back in the comfortable, climate-controlled environment of his study. The familiar red-tinted light of their star filtered through the window, and the very air felt positively refreshing after Earth's thick atmosphere. The students slumped in their chairs, looking exhausted despite having never physically left the room. Virtual reality could do that. The mind believed what it experienced, and their minds had just spent considerable time struggling against Earth's hostile environment. "Professor," Zoara said after catching her breath, "I just realized I forgot to ask something. What about Earth's sapient species? The humans, are they as scary as their planet's animals?" Glonix laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the study. "That, young one, would require a book of its own to properly explain. The full answer involves their history, psychology, sociology, and evolution. But if you want a simple answer," he paused, considering his words carefully, "humans are the species that invented nuclear fission bombs. Before they created widely available nuclear power, they developed fusion bombs a full century before they managed to create functional fusion reactors. They weaponized nearly every scientific discovery before finding peaceful applications for it. They've driven numerous species to extinction just by accident, and they fought wars over everything from resources to ideological differences to which interpretation of their various religions is correct." The students sat in stunned silence, processing this information. "They're also," Glonix continued, his tone softening slightly, "capable of incredible compassion, creativity, and cooperation. They'll risk their lives to save strangers, dedicate themselves to protecting the very animals that might kill them. And they've created art and music that can move even non-human species to emotion. They're paradoxical creatures, really, capable of both terrible destruction and remarkable beauty. That's what makes them perhaps the most dangerous species of all. You never quite know which aspect you're going to encounter." Another moment of contemplative silence fell over the study. Finally, Ginto raised his hand slightly, an old classroom habit.
"Professor, you mentioned the Encyclopedia as one page for non-Earth species. What monster deserves that single page?"
Glonix laughed again, but this time it was darker, more ironic.
"Ah yes, the token non-Earth entry. The Ignirian parasites, for one. Nasty creatures. They burrow into the host's nervous system and are nearly impossible to remove without killing the victim. The surgery required has a 30% mortality rate even with our best medical technology."
"What would happen if one of them bit a human?" Zabar asked, his curiosity apparently overwhelming his exhaustion. Glonix's eyes twinkled with amusement.
"You're like hatchlings with your hypothetical scenarios. But since you asked, there was actually one documented incident. One Ignirian parasite somehow got loose on a human space station. It managed to bite one of the humans, and the result was a severe infection that proved fatal."
"Oh no," Zoara said sympathetically. "The poor human."
"The parasite,"
Glonix corrected, his expression deadpan.
The parasite was the one that died. Apparently, human blood chemistry was so hostile to it that it essentially dissolved from the inside out within minutes. The human reported mild itching at the bite site that lasted a few days. The three students sat in perfect stillness, their expressions frozen in complete astonishment. The implications of that simple statement, that a galactic terror, worthy of inclusion in the Monster Encyclopedia, had died from merely biting a human, seemed to rewrite their understanding of the universe's danger hierarchy. Slowly moving, as if in a daze, the three students rose from their chairs. Zoara clutched the Monster Encyclopedia to her chest, but now she held it with something approaching reverence rather than skepticism. "Thank you for the lesson, Professor," she said formally, her voice slightly shaky. We understand now. 49 pages actually seems quite conservative."
It's been educational,
Ginto added, though he looked like he might need some time to fully process what he learned. "We won't take any more of your time," Zubar concluded, already moving toward the door with the others. As they filed out of his study, Glonix heard them beginning to discuss what they'd learned in hushed, awed tones. Their voices faded as they moved down the corridor, but he caught snippets. "Dissolved from the inside. Electric eels."
everything there wants to kill you.
Alone in his study once more, Professor Glonix settled back into his chair with a satisfied sigh. His joints ached from the residual effects of the simulated gravity, and he'd probably need to take some anti-inflammatory medication before bed, but it had been worth it. He'd forgotten how much he loved teaching, the moment when students' preconceptions shattered and reformed, when they truly understood something for the first time. He was too old for regular classes now, his body no longer able to handle the demanding schedule, but moments like these reminded him why he'd chosen education in the first place. Reaching over to his desk, he picked up his own copy of the Galactic Monster Encyclopedia, the original author's edition with his handwritten notes in the margins. He flipped it open to page 1, which began the Earth section with an introduction he'd written himself decades ago. "The following 49 pages detail the various life forms of a single planet designated Earth, located in the Sol system. The disproportionate coverage is not an editorial oversight, but a necessity. Earth is, without exaggeration, the most hostile life-bearing planet ever discovered by the Galactic Federation. It is our recommendation that Earth be permanently classified as a Category X Death World, and that no unauthorized visits be permitted under any circumstances." He smiled, remembering the arguments with the editorial board, the disbelief of his peers, the accusations of exaggeration, but every expedition since had only reinforced their findings. If anything, they'd underestimated Earth's dangers in those early days. Outside his window, the red dwarf star that warmed their world continued its ancient, peaceful rotation. Their planet had its own challenges, certainly. Every world did, but nothing, absolutely nothing, compared to the magnificent horror that was Earth. And honestly, Glonix wouldn't have it any other way. After all, what was the point of a monster encyclopedia if it didn't catalog the most monstrous planet ever discovered? Even if that meant 49 pages for one world and 1 page for all the others combined. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders. But Earth was something special. Something terrifying, something that made every other entry in the encyclopedia look like a children's story by comparison. And Professor Glonix, retired educator and survivor of 3 Earth expeditions, would make sure no one ever forgot it.